welcome you to the Priscilla R. Tyson Cultural Arts Center on this 20th day of the month of April, 2023. For what? Our Conversations and Coffee program. I'm Ellen O'Shaughnessy, coordinator of the program. We're delighted to have with us today Annie Chrissy Burley, our artist in residence here at the Cultural Arts Center. Annie received her Bachelor of Fine Arts in Animation and Fine Arts from the Columbus College of Art and Design. She exhibited her wonderful art in our Loft Gallery exhibit this winter. She works with multiple media like painting, sculpture, animation, cinematography. She shares that while creating large figurative sculptures in wood, papier-mâché, yarn, animations, or mixed media, works that incorporate animated figures into three-dimensional works of art, her subjects connect Black female representations through the biblical lens of Imago Dei, image of God. Annie says that with her background in character design and storytelling, she reflects and exposes this tension found in alienating common depictions of African American women in media against this biblical reality, Imago Dei. I have asked Christy to tell us more, and she will. This beauty she shares. And through her work, she creates narratives whereby the ingrained ideas and images of Black women are transformed, made powerful and new. Annie is represented by the Hammond Harkins Gallery. Work is in there with Amina Robinson's. We had Amina Robinson for Conversations and Coffee. And now we're having you, right? We'll bring her with us in spirit, huh? Your work is also exhibited at the Roy G. Biv Gallery, the Pearl Conrad Art Gallery, and more. You're the recipient of the 2022 Individual Artist Grant from the Greater Columbus Arts Council. Wow. Annie shares that being a resident with us at the Cultural Arts Center has had a great impact on her. That impact has been in many areas of endurance, growth, and remaking into sound, structural components, huh?
Yeah.
And I love it how you say, if I hadn't been at the Cultural Arts Center, a lot of the work I was doing would never have been completed. I was able to take a class where I tried a new thing, and I got to experiment with the work I was making in these classes. Wonderful. The overall experience and connection between the rest of the staff, the students, and the community was everything I was hoping for, and being part of this residency and more. How wonderful you say that. And you say, I'm so thankful.
I really
and we, Annie, are so thankful for you and your being with us. So take it away, huh?
Yeah, well, hello.
Yeah.
I'm so glad to be able to sit down finally. And I know some people are waiting on the last one, but COVID said, I have another plan for you. And so I guess the Lord then said, well, then I have another plan for that. We're going to have it today. And, you know, I just want to say hello to everyone. I want to say hello to, you know, all forms of media here, picking up this artist talk and conversation and coffee. I like having artist talks where I can just briefly discuss who I am, what I do, and then especially since we had the show, I've kind of set more so time aside in my slideshows to try to go in depth in that show because the show's not up right now. Would have had us go out in the last conversation and coffee and just talk about the work, but now I kind of have to double time. So if it feels like I'm going fast in me going through the slides, it's because I do want to make more time for that. And then if we, I want to leave space for anyone who has questions and stuff, if they want to go back to previous works or how I make work and stuff like that, then we can go back kind of near the end. But I just wanted to give you guys a heads up about that. So my name is Annie Chrissy Burley, and like, as Ellen said, my work just goes over a broad range of topics kind of stemming from the root of how I see myself as an image bearer of Christ, and then how I then look at culture, specifically animation and film, and look at those things and dissect those things, interpersonally, and through my work, through what I feel like even the Lord saying to me about my personal life in that moment. And I believe that there's an element of representation that can sometimes be lacking when it comes to animation, because historically a lot of people who've been on the animation table, which I'll talk about later, have been people who are not like me, as a African-American woman. So I like just pulling from that with multiple, mediums, merging a lot of elements and details, specifically around what will fit the pieces, what will fit the work. Like, for instance, I look at character design on the outside level, with animations that you might commonly know, and specifically African-American female character design. And I make commentary on that through my work. Or I have my own narratives that I create that stem from and stem from culture and statistics and references to, things that are actually happening with African-American women, and then reinterpreting it in a more animation type narrative kind of way. And so sometimes I have series, for instance, where it's their insular series that go over a specific topic. Like, for instance, like I have my Ghetto Fractal series where it talks about kind of like fractalization in the sense of communities, and also tying it to, I think, the natural fractalization of natural fractals in nature. Like when you think about like broccoli, when you think about clouds, like just the construct of life, and how in the African American community it can be these elements of repeating sometimes, repeating, how would you say, instances of like trauma, are repeating instances of, say, like historical areas where, bad history or something like that, and bad interactions and stuff, and kind of talking about those things and relating it in a narrative sense between, in this series, a mother and daughter. And so I can do stuff like that. I also do work where I make comics and do straight on stories like comics, animation, etc. A lot of my current work has been kind of like focusing more on the aesthetic, using the aesthetic of animation to really kind of get my point across. Like, for instance, I'll come back to this piece later, but this piece is taking from animation cells, like the visual language of animation cells, and using that to kind of like make a layered piece, as if you're taking a frame from the animation itself and you're just having it as like an art piece. And this is large scale, so sometimes it's actual traditionally made, like physically made, and sometimes like these pieces I'm showing, I make digital works. that lean on the foe and lean on kind of like, you know, is this a real object or not? And I believe that those having the traditional and digital ties back into a conversation of how we do have traditional animation and digital animation right now. So as I was resident at the Cultural Arts Center, I was able to, like what Ms. Ellen said, create a lot of works. But before I became an artist in resident, I had an exhibition it was mentioned, at Reggie Bibb with artists Tyler Davis and Amy Weissman. And in that exhibition, I tackled basically protest imagery. So this the work that was being made was made around 2020 when all the stuff was going on with George Floyd. There was a lot of conversation, especially online within the Black female community, about Black femicide at that same time. And I follow a lot of Black women who talk about colorism and representation and corrective promotion in dark skin, African American, like dark skin representation, and how sometimes that type of representation that we were seeing constantly, especially with protest imagery, kind of links back to old narratives of Black women being more durable, you know, the masculinization of African American women, and some people would call certain tropes like the sapphire trope and the mammy trope rearing its head in a lot of protest imagery. For me specifically, as a believer, I've kind of tried to lean back into what it means to be, say, like a daughter of Christ. And there's a lot of elements of that, as far as like femininity in that aspect, that I align with more, that I had questions about in the representations of protesting and stuff like that, of African American women protesting, being on the front lines, but not having not being able to be as someone who the Lord fights for, in my opinion, as someone who, you know, is able to be like, sit, relax, be a woman and not be a soldier. And I connect a lot of those conversations to conversations of the 60s and, you know, even earlier than that, as far as like slavery, women working on the field, Black women sharecroppers and stuff like that, not having, you know, we kind of having to live this life constantly on the front lines, doing work for a system, which for me as a believer, I kind of lean back and I'm like, I want to live a different life. So I expressed that a lot in those earlier pieces. And in that expression, I started diving into topics that were very much talking about Black femicide, that are very much kind of wrestling with not just protest imagery, but what happened, some of the aftermath that came out with them talking about the things that were going on with the Black Lives Matter Foundation and the, you know, allocation of funds to certain properties. You know, and in the Black community, Black people already knew that there was not a full consistency in that foundation, but that was specifically, the movement was more so for the point of the people, but what the representation of it obviously was focused on the Black Lives Matter Foundation. So then there's this fallout. Then the mothers and the fathers of some of the men and women who were murdered by police brutality came out and was like, basically like, listen, like, y'all don't put our sons and daughters in your artwork and your posters, whatever, like, y'all, at some point, you guys have to just just, be honest and be upfront with us. You guys have been out of communication with us. Like, the money has been, where's this money? The money has not been to us. So it was a lot of grief in that. And a lot of my work in the show that I'm about to talk about has this progression where it starts from pieces that I made from 2020 to 2021, kind of then pieces that I started making around that time, me taking those pieces and working on them during the residency. And so that old narrative was something that I was considering, but I feel like I was being led into a new narrative as I was doing more research at my time here. And I'll go back to some of these, but I was just... And so basically then what the show ended up being, after I'd done my research, was a personal journey. And I'll go back over the show's artist statement, but a personal journey through that, working through those elements of grief and disillusionment with culture and with what was being represented and with, like, the shortcomings of, like, our humanity being on display as, like, as a group of people. Oh, I'll get back to that one. It's in reference to the Bible verse that the title is actually, referring to. And so while I was here, I started doing research with this book called Birth of an Industry. And I was able with this book to make connections and jumping off points with the rise of the animation industry that we have today. And it's leaning from minstrelsy to vaudeville to, because animation started as, like, this magical performance in vaudeville. Like, the animation was, like, when you think about Winsor McKay, he would take character designs and, like, they're mostly stereotype character design, like, say, a black face or a yellow face, or, like, very horrible depictions of, like, Chinese people and Jews and et cetera. Like, he would kind of morph, those character designs during the animation segment of the vaudeville. And it was more so like, how to describe, it was more so like an act. It wasn't anything on screen, but it was like, on a piece of paper, like an easel, and, him morphing these different kinds of people. And so that then obviously leads into the animation industry that we have, since when we think about it, Winsor McKay is, like, considered the father of animation. And so that's how we have the rise of, like, animation in film through him in his works, not just, like, the dinosaurs, like, he has, I can't remember the dinosaur's name, but that's what he's mostly known for. But that piece was one out of many when he had, say, like a Little Nemo. And in Little Nemo, he had characters, racialized characters that were stereotypical, that came from actually that vaudeville act that he was doing. And so, but there has always been a progression of minstrelsy in character design. And that goes to just the element that I know minstrel shows would normally, I guess, be something where it's like white people putting on blackface and stuff. But also, to be honest, the history is that black people would participate in minstrelsy for various reasons, for work, to get ahead, or however, to, be representation, because that would say, like, the only acceptable form of black representation if you put black people in minstrels, in a minstrel outfit. And I mean, I can debate on the morality of kind of black people doing that, but right now I'm taking the approach with this work of that the reality is a little bit more dubious. So the show's title comes from a writer named James Weldon Johnson, and he created the Black national anthem, "Lift Every Voice and Sing." And during that time of grief that was kind of working through the things that are going on with the Black Lives Matter movement and the Black female representation in that, there was a heart cry that I love that would kind of like use from that, from that specific "Lift Every Voice and Sing." The lyrics I felt were so poignant for me as a believer, and I just resonated with it. And I just did more research on it, and I did more research on him. And then I've come to find that through the process of that research, I come to find I've disagreed with this man in a lot of ways, and it had me very embittered in a way, if I would describe about it. And number two, it was revealed to me that he's not a believer, but a lot of his work is known to be centered on taking Black Christianity and stuff like that and using it to create pieces, to basically, he performed these in churches and stuff like that, but he was atheist and agnostic. And so I kind of was wrestling with this idea that, well, minstrelsy, for instance, I feel is not just I feel like minstrelsy can not just regulate itself to just blackface, but the performative nature of performing as another group of people, or like Black culturally performing as someone that you're not really being. And so I was tying this into some of the things that were happening, like people were kind of talking about the Black Lives Matter founders, like being more performative than on the ground, and some of those things that then on the grassroots level being some of those things that were an issue in how they got here, to like, well, this man, he's built his kind of background foundation off of like Black Southern Christianity, but he wasn't a practicing believer. And there's a lot of like the irony, hence the show title, "Drunk with the Wine of the World, We Forget Thee." It's like, well, man, like I feel like, the irony is this verse is connection to this stanza of that song is in connection to Revelations 18:3 that talks about basically the end time prophecy about kind of like Babylon and people getting caught up in the world and stuff like that. And it's like, well, the person who created this song, my personal belief, I'm like, he done forgot, you know what I mean? He put that stanza in here. It's like, but you don't even believe in the Lord, And it was just it was kind of the irony, and I feel like this disillusionment coming back in culture. Like this song is a cultural staple in the African American community. But all I've ever known about it, all I've ever known about the person who made it, all I've ever known about kind of like when you think about a lot of the movements and, even the civil rights movement, a lot of that we've ever known is even the narrative, like even the narratives of those things, like what's the real history, and do I even fully align with everything that has happened, like ideologically? Of course, like the fruit we have today is a blessing, but I think there's some ideologies that were held by say like even like James Weldon Johnson about our humanity in connection to art, like us proving our humanity through art, is a little rocky in his own theology, as far as like being a little rocky, but producing theological works. It's just this kind of wrestle that I had. And with that, I was going through a lot of that in these works. So I was going through a lot of these elements with these works coming up. And these were kind of like the works that I was originally talking about that I started working on in early 2020. And they're very kind of just a little kind of dealing with those realities and stuff. And for instance,
Beautiful.
like for instance, this piece is was kind of like at that time was working with those realities specifically. So I have the background being kind of where I stay, but the foreground being elements of protest imagery, reappropriated, and in my own style, and kind of like putting on top. And it's like a lot of the works in the beginning of the show were wrestling with the realities were wrestling with the things I was telling you guys that I was going through. So that's the kind of like up and down, the first layer and the background layer. And then here we have the piece, it was like the big piece right there called We Thought We Were Doing Something. And I think that one was the piece that I feel like tackled just kind of like this disillusionment really head on in those elements, and then asking like, dang, like the performative element, was this a performative, was all the effort of the marching a performative element? Was that even minstrelsy in a sense? Performing something, like we are thinking that this movement is doing something. Like this was specifically, the background was specifically, we had a women's version of, there was a men's kind of march and a women's march for that specifically. Women wore all white, and men in the previous one were dressed up. There was a lot of kind of commentary about black men being dressed up and that being an element of where it could be like a separation, where there can be tend to be a separation between class and that. And so there's a lot of that conversation going on within the Black community here. And then with this piece was like, okay, on the woman's side, were we just getting dressed up, like, or was there actually something going on? Like, was there some substance to what's happening? So it's like this discontent and disillusionment with what has happened. But then also like showing that other side of like grief, as the main character is not someone who's just going like on the front lines, but she's back and reflecting. And I don't think that was something that's constantly represented all the time. Having this kind of maybe discontent with things that have gone on after all the work and effort that, many African American women put out in protesting, in organizing, in trying to, get laws passed, et cetera. So then that leads into these pieces where it's very much kind of stemming from that main piece itself. And over the course of the time as me being an artist in resident, I was finding that in, the backgrounds of these pieces, all this, kind of elements fighting with each other. But then that, I feel like the Lord is trying to bring me into a sense of peace and understanding. And so in the first layer is kind of like that separation that's happening between the soul of the person that's being represented in the background, which is just basically I appropriated a character design onto Black Lives Matter protest pictures, and just picked people out the crowd in their poses, and then kind of drew them in the character design that I have in the foreground, the first layer, but then the first layer being a more vulnerable, like a separation from that. Like, those people have to go home and wrestle with these realities and wrestle emotionally. And I believe, for me, I found that, sometimes I feel like the Lord can make space for that, make a space of peace, God being in present, just in like presence with Him in terms of my walk and stuff. So I try to make the color, like those little paint skins, be that separation between the noise and the background, so that that character can have their moment to be vulnerable. And in this work, it's still wrestling with this minstrelsy reality and stuff, and Black people playing a part in various ways in that minstrel process. And the other character, or this other kind of character to the left, is, these lines of actions, like what are you gonna do? Like, what are you doing when you're faced with that reality, and behind is kind of like this faded figure of what I honestly have kind of made kind of to reference like the Spirit of the Lord, and this character like interacting with those two realities.
Anybody have any questions, comments?
Was that a character in blue in the background? Was that the character you said referenced the Lord? Mm-hmm. Right, that kind of shade blue. Yeah, I didn't see it at first, but you said that. I didn't see it.
And so there comes, and I mentioned archipel because you guys, to get a reference to what I'm talking about, you guys can go to this YouTube channel, Archipel Documentaries, but that is going to come. As I was an artist in resident and working through these things, I really was like, okay, well, Lord, touch my heart, because I was not only just going through those things, but I was also going through personal life struggles and working with unforgiveness and working with areas in my life where I'm just like dealing with betrayal, and on top of that feeling of a cultural betrayal, you have to deal with that. And I think over time, I feel the Lord was showing me my own heart, an element of my own heart, and my own mistrust with Him, my own mistrust with, say, even the realities that, God calls us to do as believers, is to still love your enemies, like still bless those who persecute you, pray for those who despitefully use you, feel like was feeling like we were being despitefully used as a community by people of our own community in various ways, or people who are saying like they're part of, like, say, a Christian, like Black people who are saying they were part of a Black Christian community at a certain time, but was more popular to just create Black Christian works for an audience, but then have personal theologies that don't really line up with the Word of God. And there's like that like element of, well, dang, we were singing these songs in church. And homie, it was like a lot. I was like, wow. And I feel like the Lord's tugging on my heart, where it's like, well, what about your minstrelsy with me? Spiritual minstrelsy. Like, what element of you, of them being performative in a specific way, that is tackling more of the physical representation, but the performance of you and your soul. Like, have you, prayed? Have you read your word? Have you also participated in the elements of what it means to also like be living a life of Christ by being obedient to forgiving those people that you really have had a hard time forgiving over here? But then you're saying something, you're being something, and before everyone else that you're not really in your own life. And it was like, so since these works kind of start progressing in the story to being more insular or more reflective of how I can get drunk with the wine of the world and forget thee as well. And so I was watching a documentary, Archipel documentary, and they were, he goes to animators, mangaka, and he documents their process. And one of the animators and directors of the film, he was talking about how he was struggling in writing these characters, but the elements of the story were so vast. And there's a moment in the screenshot where he had two of his characters. One was kind of on the floor, and he said that the one on the floor has a hard time with trusting, hard time developing relationships and stuff, and was connecting that there's those two sides of this, him as a creator represented in that character, and also the boy character who's reaching out to the girl character who's on the floor, trying to help her up, and then she eventually, in the next scene, denies his help. But like, I was like, dang, how's this like? I feel like that's almost where my heart posture is and what the Lord had revealed to me, and opening up trust and vulnerability there. And so here, I just kind of reappropriated specifically that scene, and I'll show you the breakdown of how I made this piece later too. And then it goes to elements of like, this is like trust fall, really building up the element of, dang, with the things and displayed in the colors and the stuff going around, needing to like lean on, needing to trust more in like the Lord in terms of like how I'm feeling, and trusting in I can go through these processes right, and lean into these processes in the more right way, so that I can come to an element of peace and forgiveness.
Could you tell us more about that work?
I'll come back to it. Okay. And so throughout the whole show, there's like a pew back there as well, and I want to tie in these cultural elements of church and stuff with some stained glass works and other elements in reference to, obviously, like a specific church. And I wanted to create a space in the back that was like, a different type of space than the spaces in the front, where it was like more outside, more outward, and then but more towards the back became more inward and more almost like a sanctuary. So I added elements like stained glass to kind of pull out those visual elements of kind of churchness and et cetera. Yes. And then I used this character. I made this kind of church lady character, and she's going to also show up in other works, but she is kind of also, in my opinion, the representation of that spiritual minstrelsy element, wolves in sheep's clothing element, feeling that it's true that those things are out, that those types of people are out there, dispersed, but there's certain things like prayer, certain things like surrender that can still happen within our communities and stuff, and true faith in the Lord that can really happen in our communities, despite what may be around. This piece right here was specifically that moment I had to have in the space where it was like a self-crucifying moment that also ties into some of those elements of representation and animation needing to be crucified, and then hopefully we know that, biblically speaking, there's the element of hope at the end of the crucifixion, Jesus is resurrected into, the first fruits of the kingdom, meaning a new man, but basically the root of that portion of the gospel is that whatever is crucified can, be reborn again into something new and more holistic. And so that's kind of like the elements I was going through in terms of, you had elements of blackface and stuff with the menstrual gloves and et cetera. And then the crucifix, the nail is like the animation peg bar, stemming like of animation, like being the nail. So taking animation and, redoing things into making something new with the same tools that were used to basically be performative for African Americans. And just some other elements to add to that space of insular thought and time and presence. In this piece, Lightbox, a tool that is used in animation is a lightbox, and so this was a piece that I felt like was really tied into, I feel like, God giving me an understanding that, there are going to be people who we live in, they can approach him or not. Or there's people who, like for instance, while I was going through in my personal life too, there's people who look like they're close to God, like they're close, but they're not, or like how they present themselves. It may seem like they're holy or may seem like they're walking in righteousness, but that's not always the case. And so it's not necessarily by the eyes that I see, but by what he sees. And so it has these elements and these dynamics of different people kind of being lit up and different people still walking in darkness. But the proximity to the light doesn't determine whether they're walking in light or darkness or not. Because I had some characters be far away from the light, but then being lit up because they're walking in light and they're walking in closeness and nearness. And so this whole show is just this progression of looking at, cultural disillusionment, looking at even like minstrelsy in all its forms, and then turned into something that was looking at a self-referentialness of elements where I have my own logs and my own eye in those areas with the grief. And with that, I was just able to have this just period on that, all that, with what I feel like the Lord calls us to do is to forgive, bless those who curse you, pray for those who despitefully use you. And that's what this piece is like, Luke 16, talking about that. And it has those elements. It has, the Black Lives Matter founders. It has James Weldon Johnson. It has them drawn, and under it is, I don't know if I have it here. I thought I did. It was hard to get some of these images on here, but under it is that verse of bless those who curse you, pray for those who spitefully use you. Just a period to have a forgiveness, to have a sober heart with real people, and find the element of reconciliation with those harder elements. So, yeah, that is basically Drunk with the Wine of the Word We Forget Thee, Thy show. I will definitely go back to those pieces.
Here of you as an artist expressing this theology and philosophy.
Yeah. And then I have I'm just going through the rest of the slides because again these were I was just going to go through those.
Let's have anybody want to respond to the art of it.
So yeah, if you guys have, I know there's previous pictures and stuff. If you guys have questions about that, you want me to go back through how I created certain pieces, and or anything else, just
Before we get to the art itself, do you still feel as much dissolution as the time period that it all occurred?
I still feel that God's grace is sufficient, because I don't think I don't think there will never not be disillusionment for me when we're dealing with like these conjunctions in culture. Like, there'll always be disagreement, and there'll always be, but I think for me is the type of heart posture that I can have where I'm not vilifying people in my heart, and where those same people need prayer. Like, like the Black Lives Matter Fund, they need prayer, in like our community, we need prayer. Like, as much as we also need like resources and stuff like that, I'm upon the impression that the Lord loves us so much that prayer puts me in submission to his will and his call, because I can't love people, I can't love people more than him, if that makes sense. So I have to change my heart posture to be able to have towards the people, even during the disillusionment, to be able to serve them well in the way that God's like, I love them enough that they need to be served in this specific way.
Those feelings happen within you as you are creating this art.
Yeah, and I'm trying to do a different mode of art creating where I'm not just putting my feelings on the chopping block. I want to be able to also have truth and revelation and positivity being reflected. But I believe there are times in, like, I'm an artist, I'm going to be making multiple bodies of work, talking about multiple different things. So I believe there's times of letting go and being authentic in a specific way that God might say, like, this is for this specific season to create in this way. So that's why once I'm having work that expresses more of my inner feelings and stuff like that, it could seem like it's a little dark, or it could seem like it's a little, but I believe the order in the chaos is, I believe, the truth that I feel the Lord's pulling out of me to talk with him about, and then reflect it back in the work.
Is there any particular expression of art that does that more for you?
Oh, say that again.
Well, in other words, what type of art allows you a freer expression of your thoughts and feelings?
Like me making it or me watching it?
Yeah.
Surrealism.
It would depend. Like I said, I think I'm like so high, each piece has, or if I'm making each piece, I'm just going to be specifically to what the piece needs. Like, if something can be expressed like in a more realist way. Pew, 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 pew. Oh, Lord have mercy. I wish I could just, okay, I'm about to go back to a piece where there is more realist, surrealist.
Oh, you were going to take us back to that one of the, yes, that one.
Oh, not that one. That one doesn't have a surrealist element to it. It's actually this one right here, where in the conversation of that Ghetto Fractal series, it references history, and this is actually just a mock-up. It's not an actual piece, but someone actually bought the piece. It's basically, though, I oil painted this, and this is a collage of all the different elements, and this is a set of 2. So someone bought one of the set, and the other set has this character on a swing, or like this character, she's the teenage girl with the red hair. But there's this element, this mother, I think maybe a son or a daughter and stuff like that, needing to have this grounded historical reference of this fractalization in our community. And it stems a lot through, obviously, what happened with chattel slavery and stuff, to the now of that second set of the piece where it's just this kind of character design that I've used. So it depends on the specific piece and what I'm trying to get out of each specific piece.
And you took your, degree from CCAD in animation, huh?
Yeah.
To this work.
Yeah.
As we come to just a few minutes, I just want to say that with your theology and philosophy, what we have wanting to do here, what we're wanting to do is see how you express this in your art. And we appreciate so much the gift of animation that you got from Columbus College of Art and Design that you have very naturally within you. Huh? Yes, and as you made reference to, many conversations could continue from your philosophy, for your theology that so energizes you to do this amazing work. What would be, in your statement about art, what would be the most appreciated in you about the way you express your art?
Might rephrase that last part.
Well, let's say, is it drawing? Is it painting? Is it like you have cinematography? Paper mache? What's your favorite?
I don't have much of a favorite in a sense. But like I said, for me, it's just about whatever the piece needs.
What the piece needs. Well, that's a good thing to live. Yeah. How about you as artists? What the piece needs. Huh? What do you say, Jen?
I mean, I kind of work like that. It's like you kind of have to look at each piece individually, and as you're creating, it kind of tells you what it needs.
Well, that's great. That's great. Lonnie, what were you going to say?
I wasn't going to say anything.
Oh, you just look so animated.
Watching.
So animated.
Within the show, the works have some similarities, and it seems evident there's a process there. You have multiple layers, so you're dealing with both physical materials and conceptual aspects. How does collage come into play? Do you start with a collage foundation and then build the concepts on top of that, or how do you use collage?
And even like, I was mentioning as far as like, these collaging elements of thought too. And so some pieces are that collaging element of thought, that collaging element of theology or secular or however, or even that because from there, I pull materials, if that makes sense too. Because, say for instance, this piece is a collage.
Oh, I love that. That's
and
wonderful.
In it is like these fake flowers of like, these hula flowers are very bright and stuff like that. And the piece actually has a layer behind it that has a hashtag every 6 hours. That hashtag is reference to Black femicide. That's culture. That's a cultural conversation and a real heavy conversation about the reality that every 6 hours a Black woman is killed, through either domestic abuse or however. And there's this element of representation. Like these are the pieces that are collaged, are screenshots, are downloaded images of every time I've seen a Black woman represented, or the heightened representation of Black women over a specific time period. And that almost overlays that reality. And so those things are collaging together. And then the top frame is like a character, like I'm referencing how how in cell animation, like these are actual cells from an actual animation piece, how when they're even displayed, how they go on top of each other, and you just see the cartoon element of it, you know what I mean?
Those are your drawings?
These ones are not my drawings. These are just actual animation cells
see.
that get sold from actual films and animations and
I
cartoons.
see, but it's coming together. It's that,
Yeah, and so even those things, layers collage on top of themselves in animation to create a scene or a frame.
Well, Annie Chrissy Burley, thank you.
Thank you all.
You're taking us quite on a journey.